You grew up with food on the table, a roof over your head. You went to school. Your parents didn't hit you. They didn't scream. They weren't alcoholics or addicts. They were just there, present but absent, physically available but emotionally unreachable. And now you're an adult, and something's wrong. Deep inside, something's broken. But when people ask about your childhood, you say it was fine. Because it was fine, right? Nothing bad happened. You can't point to a specific trauma. You can't name a wound. But you feel it. Every single day, you struggle with things that seem easy for other people. Setting boundaries feels impossible. Asking for what you need feels selfish. Trusting someone completely terrifies you. And intimacy, real, deep intimacy, makes you want to run. Real talk, because you're carrying an invisible wound. One that nobody taught you to recognize. One that our society doesn't even acknowledge as real trauma. Today, we're diving into the dark psychology of childhood emotional neglect. The wound that leaves no scars but damages you in ways you're only beginning to understand. Let's get clear on what we're talking about. Because emotional neglect is the most misunderstood form of childhood trauma. It's not what happened to you. It's what didn't happen. It's not the presence of bad things. It's the absence of necessary things. Your parents fed you, but they didn't see you. They housed you, but they didn't know you. They kept you alive, but they didn't help you feel alive. Emotional neglect is when your emotional needs were consistently unmet, when your feelings were ignored, dismissed, or treated as inconvenient, when you learned that what you felt didn't matter, that who you were wasn't interesting enough to engage with. Listen, this part hits hard because it's so subtle. There's no dramatic story to tell, no villain to point to, just a quiet, persistent emptiness where connection should have been. Maybe you came home excited about something and nobody asked about it. Maybe you cried and nobody comforted you. Maybe you tried to share your thoughts and got a distracted while they scrolled their phone. One time, that's normal. Every time, that's neglect. Deep down, you know this. Those moments taught you that your inner world didn't matter, that your emotions were a burden, that the best way to get along was to need nothing from anyone. And here's the dark psychology of it. Emotional neglect creates what therapists call developmental trauma. Your brain didn't develop the neural pathways for emotional regulation because nobody taught you how to process feelings. You didn't learn that emotions have names, causes, and can be worked through because nobody showed you. So you grew up emotionally illiterate, feeling everything but understanding nothing, drowning in emotions you can't identify or express. So what happens to a child whose emotional needs are never met? They adapt. They survive. But they don't thrive. Your brain made a deal with reality. If nobody's going to meet my needs, I'll just stop having them. Except you can't actually stop having needs. You can only stop acknowledging them. Stop expressing them. Stop believing they're valid. This is what psychologists call learned helplessness combined with emotional suppression. You learn that expressing needs leads nowhere, so you stop trying. You learn that emotions make adults uncomfortable, so you stop showing them. You became the easy child, the one who didn't ask for much, the one who was so independent and so mature for your age. And everyone praised you for it, not realizing they were praising you for abandoning yourself. And the really messed up part? This adaptation made sense. It kept you safe. It kept adults from being annoyed with you. It kept the fragile peace. But what keeps you safe as a child destroys you as an adult. Because now you're out in the world, trying to have relationships, trying to build a life, but you're operating with the emotional equipment of that neglected child. You can't identify what you need because you were never allowed to have needs. You can't set boundaries because you were never taught you deserve them. You can't ask for help because you learned that needing things makes you a burden. You can't trust people because the first people you trusted were emotionally absent. Let's talk about what emotional neglect did to your developing brain. Because this is where it gets scientifically dark. Your brain develops through interaction. Neural pathways for emotional regulation, for self-soothing, for understanding emotions. These pathways are built through what psychologists call co-regulation. A baby cries. A parent responds with comfort. The baby's nervous system learns. When I'm distressed, relief comes. Emotions are temporary. I'm safe. That's how emotional regulation develops. Through repetition. Through a caregiver helping you regulate until you can do it yourself. But if that caregiver is emotionally absent, if you cry and nobody comes, if you're distressed and nobody helps you understand what you're feeling, those neural pathways don't develop properly. You're left with an underdeveloped emotional regulation system, like trying to run complex software on hardware that was never fully built. This is why small things can overwhelm you as an adult. Why criticism feels like annihilation. Why conflict sends you into panic. Your emotional regulation system was never fully constructed. And here's another dark adaptation. You developed what therapists call an external locus of control. Because your internal world was never validated, you learned that your internal experience doesn't matter. What matters is external. Other people's reactions, other people's approval, other people's needs. So now, as an adult, you don't know who you are without someone else's input. You can't make decisions without seeking approval. You can't trust your own judgment. You look outside yourself for validation that should come from within. This is why you're so people-pleasing. Why you can't say no. Why you twist yourself into knots trying to be what others need. Because your sense of self was never internally developed. It was always externally dependent. But wait, it gets even darker. Emotional neglect often creates what's called disorganized attachment. Your child brain wanted to attach to your parents. That's biological programming. But they were inconsistently available. Sometimes present, usually absent. Never reliably attuned. So your attachment system got confused. Do I reach for connection, or do I protect myself from disappointment? The answer your brain settled on. Both. Simultaneously. Which creates an exhausting internal conflict that follows you into every relationship. You want intimacy but fear it. You crave closeness but sabotage it. You pull people close then push them away. Because your attachment system learned that people are both the source of comfort and the source of pain. And the person trying to love you, they feel crazy. Because you're sending mixed signals. Because your nervous system is firing contradictory commands based on early programming that says connection is dangerous, but disconnection is deadly. Real talk. This is why your relationships feel impossible. Not because you're broken, but because you're running relationship software that was programmed in an environment of emotional scarcity. And that software doesn't work in an environment of potential abundance. Here's one of the cruelest aspects of emotional neglect. You can't heal what you can't name. Survivors of physical abuse can point to what happened. Survivors of verbal abuse can remember the words. But survivors of emotional neglect? We're left grasping at air, trying to explain a wound that has no story. My parents were fine. They just weren't really there emotionally. And people respond, well, nobody's perfect. At least they didn't abuse you. And you feel crazy. Because you know something damaged you. You feel it every day, but you can't prove it. You can't point to the moment it happened because it wasn't a moment. It was 1,000 small moments of not being seen, not being heard, not matching. And here's the darkest part. You probably defend your parents. Because they did provide for you. They weren't monsters. They were just emotionally unavailable. Maybe because they were working. Maybe because they were depressed. Maybe because they were emotionally neglected themselves. And understanding their reasons makes it even harder to acknowledge your pain. Because if they had good reasons for their neglect, does that mean your pain is invalid? No. It means two things can be true. They did their best, and their best wasn't enough for your emotional development. But our culture doesn't give you permission to acknowledge that. We have language for bad parents. We don't have language for good enough parents who nonetheless left their children emotionally starving. So you minimize. It wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. And every time you minimize, you're reenacting the original neglect. You're telling that child inside you that their pain doesn't matter, that their needs weren't important. You're becoming the parent who didn't see you. Deep down, you know this. The wound is real even if you can't name it. The damage is valid even if there's no dramatic story. The pain counts even if you can't point to a specific moment. You were emotionally abandoned, not through dramatic rejection, but through quiet, persistent absence. And that absence shaped everything about how you relate to yourself and others. Let's talk about what emotional neglect does to your adult relationships. Because this is where the invisible wound becomes visible. You attract emotionally unavailable people. Not by coincidence, by familiarity. Your nervous system recognizes emotional distance as love, because that's what love looked like in childhood. So when someone is actually emotionally available, present, and attentive, it feels wrong. Suffocating. Too much. But someone who's distant, inconsistent, hard to reach, that feels like home. That feels like love. Because your attachment system was wired in an environment of scarcity, and scarcity feels normal. Let's talk about what emotional neglect does to your adult relationships. Because this is where the invisible wound becomes visible. You attract emotionally unavailable people. Not by coincidence, by familiarity. Your nervous system recognizes emotional distance as love, because that's what love looked like in childhood. So when someone is actually emotionally available, present, and attentive, it feels wrong, suffocating, too much. But someone who's distant, inconsistent, hard to reach, that feels like home. That feels like love. Because your attachment system was wired in an environment of scarcity, and scarcity feels normal. Or maybe you do the opposite. Maybe you're the emotionally unavailable one. Because getting close means being vulnerable, and vulnerable means potentially being ignored again. So you keep people at arm's length. You commit, but don't fully invest. You're present, but not available. This is the avoidant attachment style born from neglect. I can't get hurt if I never fully let anyone in. But here's the thing, you're lonely either way. Lonely with the unavailable person who won't meet your needs. Lonely in the relationship where you won't let yourself be fully known. Emotional neglect taught you that your needs are a burden. So in relationships, you don't express them. You wait for your partner to guess, to read your mind, to just know what you need without you having to ask. And when they don't, you don't get angry. You get quiet. You withdraw. You tell yourself, see, nobody really cares. But how can they meet needs you won't express? How can they love you when you won't let them see you? And let's talk about conflict. For people raised with emotional neglect, conflict feels apocalyptic. Because disagreement meant emotional withdrawal in childhood. So now, any conflict triggers that childhood fear. If I upset them, they'll leave. If I have needs they can't meet, they'll disconnect. So you avoid conflict at all costs. You say you're fine when you're not. You swallow your feelings. You prioritize peace over honesty. But here's what nobody tells you. Relationships without conflict aren't peaceful. They're stagnant. They're superficial. Real intimacy requires being able to disagree and still be safe. But you never learn that. You learn that having needs or feelings that differ from your caregivers was dangerous. So you perform agreement. You perform low maintenance. You perform not needing anything. And inside, you're dying. Because you're in a relationship, but you're still alone. Because they don't know the real you. They know the version of you that learned to survive by needing nothing. Low-key, the saddest part is this. You're replicating your childhood. You're choosing or creating relationships where your emotional needs go unmet. Not because you want to suffer, but because it's familiar. Because your nervous system knows how to navigate emotional scarcity. Emotional abundance is foreign territory. And breaking this pattern? It requires doing the thing that terrifies you most. Being vulnerable. Expressing needs. Risking rejection. Trusting that this time, maybe, your emotional needs will be met. That's the work. And it's the hardest work there is. So how do you heal from something that left no visible scars? How do you fix damage you can't even fully articulate? First, you name it. You say the words, I experienced emotional neglect in childhood. My emotional needs were not met. That wasn't okay. That damaged me. Not to blame your parents. Not to play victim. But to acknowledge reality so you can work with it. You can't heal what you won't name. And the first step is giving yourself permission to call it what it was, neglect. Second, you reparent yourself. You learn to give yourself what your parents couldn't give you. This means learning to identify your own emotions. To sit with them instead of suppressing them. To ask yourself, what do I need right now? And actually answering honestly. This means validating your own feelings instead of dismissing them. When you're hurt, you don't tell yourself to get over it. You acknowledge, this hurts. That makes sense. My feelings are real. This means setting boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. Saying no. Asking for what you need. Risking disappointing people. This is reparenting. Becoming the attuned, responsive, emotionally available caregiver to yourself that you never had. Third, you do the work in therapy. Because here's the thing. Emotional neglect created attachment wounds that are best healed in relationship. Specifically, in a therapeutic relationship where someone is consistently attuned to you. A good therapist gives you what your parents didn't, consistent emotional presence. They see you. They hear you. They validate your feelings. They teach you that your inner world matters. Over time, your nervous system learns a new pattern. When I express my needs, someone responds. When I share my feelings, I'm not dismissed. Connection is safe. That's how attachment wounds heal, through new, reparative relational experiences. Fourth, you build relationships with people who are emotionally available. This feels weird at first, maybe even boring, because drama and inconsistency feel like passion when you're used to them. But healthy relationships feel different. They feel stable, secure, safe, and your wounded inner child might panic at first. This isn't familiar. This can't be real love. But it is. It's just love you never experienced before. Fifth, you practice self-compassion. Because healing isn't linear. You'll backslide. You'll fall into old patterns. You'll attract another emotionally unavailable person or sabotage a good relationship. When that happens, you don't shame yourself. You acknowledge, that's my wounded child acting out. They're trying to keep me safe the only way they know how. And you gently redirect. You remind yourself, I'm learning a new way. It's okay that it's hard. Healing from emotional neglect is slow. It's uncomfortable. It requires you to feel all the feelings you spent your childhood suppressing. It requires you to need people when you learned that needing was dangerous. But it's possible, and you deserve it. Listen, if you're still here, if you've recognized yourself in this video, I need you to hear something. You deserve more. You deserve parents who saw you, who knew you, who made time and space for your emotional world. You deserve to have your feelings validated instead of dismissed. You deserve to learn that your needs matter, that your emotions are important, that you are worthy of attention and care. You didn't get that, and that's not your fault. Your childhood wasn't fine just because nothing dramatically bad happened. Absence of harm is not the same as presence of love, and you needed more than just the absence of harm. You needed active, engaged, emotionally attuned care. You didn't get it, and you've spent your whole life trying to convince yourself it doesn't matter, that you're fine, that you don't need what you never had. But deep down, you know it matters. It shaped everything. And pretending it didn't just keeps you stuck in the same patterns. So today, give yourself permission to acknowledge the truth. Your childhood left you with an invisible wound. And that wound is real, valid, and deserving of care. Not so you can stay stuck in victim mentality, but so you can finally, actually heal. Because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. And you've been too busy defending your parents, minimizing your pain, and telling yourself you're fine to actually face the truth. The truth is, you were emotionally neglected, and it wasn't okay. And also, you're not broken. You're wounded, and wounds can heal. If emotional neglect shaped your childhood, I'm sorry. You deserve better. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued for who you were, not just for how little trouble you caused. But you're not that powerless child anymore. You're an adult with the ability to give yourself what you never received, to build relationships where your emotional needs matter, to heal the invisible wound one day at a time. It's hard work, the hardest, but you're already doing it by being here, by recognizing the truth, by refusing to minimize your pain anymore. Drop a comment if this resonated. This community gets it. We're healing together. Your wound is invisible, but you're not, and you matter.